Hey everybody, it's James Lindsay. You're listening to the new Discourses podcast. And, the rumor is that I don't punch left, I only punch right these days. So I want to cover something very important. I've been trying to find this again. I knew I had seen it, but it's been a long time and I managed to find it again. In some sense, this is arguably a document, which is an anonymous document. It was a leaflet that was distributed at the Pride March in New York in June of 1990, and is arguably the beginning point, the true beginning point. You could talk about Stonewall or whatever, but the true beginning point of the queer militancy movement, which is part of the queer liberation movement, which is part of the queer activism movement that is all informed by queer theory. So this is a piece in the chain linking queer theory to the situation of queer militancy that we're all talking about now and that we all see: shooting schools, doing other forms of violence, threatening violence, even including the horrific murder, assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk. So maybe it's worth dredging up this anonymous leaflet, which is titled nothing other than "Queers Read This." And like I said, it's a leaflet distributed at a Pride March in New York City, published anonymously by, quote, queers in June of 1990. So that's, for those of you keeping score at home, 35 years ago. A little context before we dive into this. I just want to kind of touch on why queer theory lends itself to violence, even though queer theory itself, if you go read Judith Butler and so on, is not terribly invested in the idea of violence. And there are a number of reasons that I think bear mentioning. One of these reasons is that none of the woke left theories exist in isolation any longer. I don't know that they ever did, but certainly since the early 2000s, they have not. They have been braided together in different threads, braided together at different times. Intersectionality was already being talked about within the context of queer, as a matter of fact, with very radical socialist movements that were tied up with violent black liberationists in the Combahee River Collective, where the concept of intersectionality came from. So by the early 2010s, earlier actually, the 2000 to 2010 range, you have the intersectional mindset actually taking over. And we actually did a podcast here, the New Discourses podcast, read the Combahee River Collective manifesto from 1977. It was formed in 1974, and it's a precursor, in fact, to Kimberly Crenshaw naming intersectionality. And she did have connections to the Combahee River Collective, as did violent radicals like Angela Davis. And so the thread of violence that came from the more radical, violent threads of the liberationist movement, whether black liberationist, queer liberationist, or whatever, all have been woven in. So there is, within the broad pantheon of queer theory, on the one side, a very academic, very scholarly, if you will, end, and there's another end that's very militant. There are other ends as well. There's a very medical end. We could get into things. But there is definitely, within the space of the queer activist arena, a militant wing. And that militant wing borrows from other militancies. Another of these threads that would have been woven in, not just through black liberationism, which, by the way, was openly Maoist, including the violence encouraged in the Cultural Revolution as a model for them, but is the post-colonial aspect, the Frantz Fanon, black skins, white masks, the wretched of the earth, which we did a podcast about Fanon and the wretched of the earth. The first chapter of the wretched of the earth, which is sort of like the stake in the ground for this decolonization movement, is concerning violence, or on violence. I forget which the exact wording is. So it's all about violence. And Fanon's hypothesis is that when you're colonized, you're actually not just oppressed, you're oppressed and kept in oppression through violence, not unlike a situation of slavery in that regard. And his claim is that the only way out of that situation and the only way to recover your human dignity is through ritual violence of the colonized versus his colonizer. And it's a very bloody path. And so liberationism doesn't just refer to, in the queer context, getting to have sex under whatever terms that you invent for yourself, or getting to live in whatever manner, gender, whatever sexuality that you deem appropriate to yourself. It also means liberating yourself from the social structures that have kept you down, so to speak. And the thinking of post-colonial theory, which is through and through from the bottom based on violence, has woven its way into this. Yes, there are this people who are just mostly interested in sex, but even going back into the 60s with the sexual liberation movement, you have this idea, which is like the proto-queer theory movement, you have this idea of violent demonstrations in the street, throwing rocks. The Stonewall incident was a violent incident. Michel Foucault engaged in violent protest and was, they were bashed by the police. And throughout all the literature in queer theory, you see this constant appeal that the heteronormative, or now they would say cis heteronormative society, and the trans issue, by the way, is particularly strong on this, is reinforced by violence. Whether it's gay bashing, or whether it's, violent arrests of homosexuals or perverts or whatever else. I mean, Gail Rubin in 1984 is talking about the police persecution of boy lovers in her document that's now considered the foundational document of queer theory. We did a 3-part series on Gail Rubin and thinking sex. You can go hear it for yourself. So there's been this thread woven in. The queer theorists partly see, but not entirely see, but in part of their pantheon of beliefs about why queer people, so to speak, are oppressed is because of the violence that is keeping them that way. This gets reified by this idea of erasure in the closet. One of the foundational texts of queer theory is called The Epistemology of the Closet, written by Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick. And Sedgwick's presentation in that particular document is that being forced into the closet gives you a certain kind of dual sight. That's the epistemology or theory of knowledge of the closet. And so you have this certain advantage over everybody else in being able to see. But the closet is, as with all Marxist theories, a article of suffering. So it is the suffering of having to hide who you truly are and erase your true identity that is ultimately such a hard problem for people who identify as queer. Now, we haven't even talked about what queer means, but we'll come back to that. This same idea appears in another foundational queer theorist writing, Judith Butler. She talks about the idea of erasure of your identity a little bit in Gender Trouble, which was in 1990 as well. But in 1993, she wrote a book called Bodies That Matter, and the concept of queer erasure or sexual minority erasure by society is rife throughout the book. It appears 30-something times. So it's not necessarily a major theme, but it's not an insignificant theme. So there's this idea within queer theory that their authentic queer identities are being erased from the world by straightness. This is one of the reasons they're so angry about childhood innocence. They believe that childhood innocence erects a space in which society can straighten children out. That's the phrasing. That's the literal phrasing that they use. The pun is intended. So children are born queer, but they are straightened out by society. And childhood innocence is a social construction or a narrative that is used to try to make sure that that's possible for certain kids, but not all kids. So it becomes this major source of oppression. But this concept of erasure gets more and more extreme to where you start to believe that if your identity is being erased, in some sense your identity is actually being killed. And people like you not being allowed to be who they are is like a genocide. So you have all of this rhetoric of violence kind of in a epistemic or structural or systemic way, and not always in a literal way, but then connected to narratives of literal violence that then justifies this mindset of self-defense in the liberationist context. And then that's what attaches to whether you're looking at it from the Frantz Fanon post-colonial side or the Black liberationist side. I'll just add the Antifa side, since we talk about things like Trans-Tifa, the trans wing of Antifa, or the Antifa wing of trans, however you want to see it. Maybe it's both. there's this Antifa wing. So Frantz Fanon writes this very radical, very violent book called Black Skins, White Masks, talking about colonialism. So the people, the basic idea is black skins. So it's people with black skin in colonized countries being forced to wear white masks or having to act white according to their colonizers' perspectives as the form of oppression. So a book that came out by AK Press, which is a kind of an Antifa training manual type thing, and a glorification of violence page after page. Mostly combining the theories of Frantz Fanon and Herbert Marcuse, if you wonder, is called Black Bloc, White Riot. It's a fairly stunning read. It's not the most intelligent book I've ever read, but this streak of militancy is well defined in the literature that these people swim in. We still haven't defined queer, but one more point. I stumbled upon this document recently, published by the FBI in spring of 2025, so just a few months ago. And they talk about what causes radicalization, extremism, mobilization, and eventually political violence by radicalized extremists. And there are a lot of themes that are very relevant to what queer theory attaches to: feelings of shame, history of abuse, feeling isolated. In my opinion, of course, is that queer theory deepens all of those problems and takes you deeper into them. It provides false solutions that people cannot get out of. Once you get far enough into, say, the gender stuff, not necessarily a homosexual lifestyle, as you might phrase it, for the people that are kind of performing it, as opposed to people who feel like that's truly what their sexuality is. As you get far enough down certain among these roads, there actually is not a road back. I just read, actually this morning, this horrifying trans regret story. This young woman crying out, telling a story about how she's crying for herself, but crying out to the world on this forum about how much she regrets starting her walk into transition at 15, undergoing the surgeries at 18, saying that she didn't even know what the words meant, but that she had her breasts removed, that she had her ovaries removed. She didn't even know what some of the words meant at 18 years old and was doing this. The point is, when you go down this path, sometimes there's no way back. And so, I forget who it was. I don't want to give it the wrong credit. I think it was Helen Joyce, but it may have been Jennifer Bilek, but I believe it was Helen Joyce as a feminist was talking about the parents of trans identifying young people and saying that think about their situation, think about the psychological situation they're in if they're suddenly confronted with evidence that what they're doing to their own child is this horror, this irreversible horror. Irreversible damage is actually what Abigail Schreier called it in her famous, heavily censored book about the issue. Not to say the contents of the book are censored. The book was not allowed to be published or sold, I should say, in a lot of places like Target and I think maybe Amazon. So imagine you're the parent of this person, right? And you've confronted the facts that, like, you broke your kid. I'm sorry, if you're one of these parents and you're hearing this, it's hard to hear it. It's true. You broke your kid. You might have thought you were doing the right thing because of inclusion, because of being an ally or whatever. You might have just been going along with it. You might, whatever. You broke your kid. You broke them. And so now you have to face this. And what are you going to do? And the answer for some people is going to be to face the facts and repent and do what you can with the situation you've now put yourself in. But the answer for a lot of people is not. It is to react. It is to become angry rather than to face what has happened honestly. It is to attack the source of the facts or attack the facts themselves. And at some point, when you go so far from reality, the only kind of attack that you can use is violence. And we find ourselves in this moment now where, whether we're talking about the gender ideology or the transgender situation, where we're down this road very far and they can't bully us anymore. They can't tell us their stupid lies. They can't use the emotional blackmail. All of their arguments, which are all fallacious and nonsense, have been defeated. They still have many institutions on their side because they've stolen control of them, literally seized the means of production of society on these issues, whether those are medical establishments, professional organizations like the American Medical Association, WPATH, American Academy of Pediatricians, if that's what that one is. I get that mixed up sometimes. Or whichever. Maybe it's pediatrics, I can't remember. Either way, the AAP, the APA, the Psychological Association, you can go down the list. All these professional associations, lots of hospitals, lots of states, lots of activist groups, lots of schools, most teachers, almost every college has all bent the knee to this, and the people are done being lied to on it, and we see the harms and we see the damage. Well, what are your options in that situation? You can't make the argument anymore. Everything you think that your life, which you've now made much more complicated and much more isolated and much more difficult and much more miserable, all these things are things you perceive your life depends on, and now it's being rolled back. It's being taken away. Violence is an answer that you have as at your disposal when you have no other answers. So there's, in my opinion, a extra set of reasons with just the queer theory circumstance as it's become institutionalized and is now being challenged and is now fallen out of favor, and they can now no longer use verbal attacks and violence in some sense to push their way through and get people to support them. And now they've had to walk it. Now they're having to deal with the fact that we can defeat all those arguments, and what's left is psychotic force. This is all exacerbated by the chemical environment around trans, which makes it a unique hotbed for this problem. People are on hormones. People have had their own hormone or whatever other parts of their body surgically removed or chemically altered, damaged, fried, or whatever. A lot of them have trauma. A lot of them have, outside of the surgeries they elected, a lot of them are waking up to the trauma of the surgeries they've decided to go through. And you're in a position where these people are, frankly, not stable, and for reasons that dip deeply into the chemical, not just the ideological or psychological. So again, you're going to find with destabilized people who feel like they don't have any way out, a higher propensity for forms of violence, whether that's violence against themselves or violence against others. And there's high levels of comorbidity there, even without talking about the percentage of them that can be identified as having some severe antisocial type personality disorder underlying the push for why they became trans in the first place. And that's just talking about the trans side. So all this stuff is to say that queer theory and queer practice lend themselves to being painted into a corner that will evoke militancy as a solution. In this case, it's a last solution, but it's always been a solution on their solution set, as this document from 1990, Queers Read This, is going to tell us. But what is queer? Let's not have any ambiguity about it. From the book Saint Foucault, which was written by David Halperin, published in 1995, where he attempts to canonize, make a saint. That's Saint Foucault, Michel Foucault, who was the French postmodernist and pedophile and sexual deviant into BDSM, fetish stuff, violent gay sex, group gay sex, all kinds of things. Guess what? Guess what Foucault died of? Yeah, AIDS. Crazy, huh? And so, at any rate, which he also thought was socially constructed, by the way, and used as a tool to oppress gays further. And by the way, that's another element. The whole AIDS epidemic of the 80s was interpreted by the broadly queer community as a form of violence against them. And now that we see some of the stuff with Fauci, we actually can raise an eyebrow in something like sympathy for that argument. But at any rate, David Halperin defines queer in Saint Foucault. For those of you who have a copy, has a pink triangle on it, which in my opinion might evoke the same triangle, the upside down red triangle that we see. It's a downward pointing triangle. I don't know, I haven't dug into this to find out, but we see the downward pointing red triangle to indicate this kind of pro-Palestine or Islamist violence, right? And now you have this upside down pink triangle on the cover of Saint Foucault, and he talks a little bit about violence, a little bit about erasure, very little, but he defines queer as a political identity. He says it's not like gay identity. It doesn't refer to any positive aspect of reality that you can identify. It is purely positional, which is to say political. He, in fact, goes on to define it as an identity without an essence, meaning that essence means, what's real to you in philosophy. So your essence is your physical being. So queer doesn't have a physical essence. There is nothing that makes you queer intrinsically. And he goes on to say that the definition for queer is anyone who is or feels, and that's the key, feels, anyone who is or feels marginalized as a result of their sexual practices, which then expands, of course, into sense of sexual identity or sex or gender identity as well. And so that's your definition of queer. It is a political rejection of the normal, the legitimate, and the dominant, says Halperin. That's who's supposed to be reading this. Politicized, angry people who believe that they're being violently erased by the world up to the point of a genocide because the world doesn't want them. And the more that they engage in their activism, it's not the more accepted they become, but the less. And then what our circumstances are over the last decade is that there was a gigantic push, as though it was the civil rights movement of the 2010s, to create space starting in really largely in 2015 with the trans bathroom and trans sports issues. This push to get acceptance that has gone horribly wrong and is now being pushed back very rapidly and very firmly and very unambiguously. And the arguments that they had, so you got to add in this extra element for that community, which is that they felt like they were about to get it and now it's being taken away, which induces in psychology something called reactance, which is a often violent response to losing what you think you had, especially if it has to do with rights or identity or whatever. And of course, like I said, they frame this out as a genocide of their identity, and they therefore justify that they are acting in self-defense. I just want you to remember as we go through this document called Queers Read This from 1990 in New York City, that there is no such thing as a queer identity in the sense of it being who somebody is. There are only queer political identities. You are no more intrinsically queer no matter what your sexuality, no matter what you feel about dysphoria regarding your gender or sex or whatever else. No matter any of that, no matter how non-binary you believe you might be or feel or whatever, there is no being queer any more than there is being Democrat or being Republican or being labor. It is a political identity, and in fact, it's a radical, angry identity. So now that we're face to face with trans militancy, which is going to continue rising, by the way, there is no out on this situation. Let's read this document and hear how the trans militancy movement in the United States and more broadly allegedly began. I haven't dug to find out if it began before this. Let's just hear what this pamphlet that was distributed at Pride in New York in June of 1990 has to say. Queers read this. How can I tell you, how can I convince you, brother, sister, that your life is in danger? Notice it begins with an existential appeal, that every day you wake up alive, relatively happy, and a functioning human being, you are committing a rebellious act. Notice that's also the definition of being politically queer. But now it's being attached, that political identity is being attached to your essential identity, who you see yourself as. Imagine the crisis you feel, that this thing you believe that you are, through your politics, through your behaviors and beliefs, is embedded in who you believe yourself to be as a person who's intrinsically in danger for your life. This is how many queer activists and theorists have thought about this issue for decades. Remember, this is 35 years old. You, it says, as an alive and functioning queer, are a revolutionary. So notice that opening framing. Just read the whole paragraph in one. How can I tell you? How can I convince you? So the idea is that nobody can hear the truth. We're all trapped in our Gnostic prison. How can I tell you? How can I convince you, brother, sister, that your life is in danger? That every day you wake up alive, relatively happy, and a functioning human being, you are committing a rebellious act. You, as an alive and functioning queer, are a revolutionary. There is nothing on this planet that validates, protects, or encourages your existence. It is a miracle you are standing here reading these words. You should by all rights be dead. Don't be fooled. Straight people own the world, and the only reason you have been spared is you're smart, lucky, or a fighter. Notice the framing of the existential crisis, the friend versus enemy mentality. Queers are in it together, allied against the enemy of straights who own and rule the world, who want you dead. This is an existential threat. It's a miracle you even have the opportunity to see this. Straight people, it goes on, have a privilege that allows them to do whatever they please and fuck without fear. I'm just going to read those words, by the way. But not only do they live a life free of fear, they flaunt their freedom in my face. Notice there's a little mistake there, right? My. This guy's rationalizing his own Gnostic poisoned sense of existence by trying to project it into other people to get them to adopt it. But not only do they live a life free of fear, they flaunt their freedom in my face. Their images are on my TV, in the magazine I bought, in the restaurant I want to eat in, and on the street where I live. Notice the things that they have sought to turn the tables backwards on. And how much of it was retribution, and how much of it was actually a civil rights movement. I want there to be a moratorium on straight marriage, on babies, on public displays of affection among the opposite sex, and media images that promote heterosexuality. Until I can enjoy the same freedom of movement and sexuality as straights, their privilege must stop, and it must be given over to me and my queer sisters and brothers. So you hear the anger, the revenge, the resentment, and the desire to turn the tables, and the classic destructive, both Marxist and Gnostic disposition. If I can't have it, nobody can. Straight people, he says, will not do this voluntarily, and so they must be forced into it. Now that could be Fanon's logic, it could be Marx's logic, talking about capitalism. Straight people will not do this voluntarily, and so they must be forced into it. Straights must be frightened into it, terrorized into it. Fear is the most powerful motivation. No one will give us what we deserve. Rights are not given, they are taken by force if necessary. Notice this black pill. All of woke left, woke right, is the black pill. The woke right black pill in this regard is seeing this stuff take over institutions and saying we can't get it back without force. No one will give us what we deserve. Rights are not given, they are taken by force if necessary. It is easier to fight when you know who your enemy is. Straight people are your enemy. Again, your friend-enemy distinction mindset, which is the core of war, not politics, which is the core of militancy, this being the maybe birthplace of the queer militant movement that, kind of comes to a point today with the thing that we're all talking about in the news. What is it? Armed queers, Salt Lake City, or whatever. They are your enemy when they don't acknowledge your invisibility and continue to live in and contribute to a culture that kills you. Every day, one of us is taken by the enemy, whether it's an AIDS death due to homophobic government inaction or a lesbian bashing in an all-night diner in a supposedly lesbian neighborhood. So, the friend-enemy distinction's clearly on display here. The idea is that you're in an existential threat, but it's prevailing society that's the enemy, and the queers must band together. militantly, violently in their own defense. It breaks off into a section titled An Army of Lovers Cannot Lose. Being queer, it says, is not about a right to privacy. It is about the freedom to be public, to just be who we are. So again, that conflation of what you do and who you are, that there should be no public-private boundary, that you should be able to be as out and open, whether it's in a straight or gay relationship or whether it's in fetish or something perverse. For them, if you aren't letting them do 110% of whatever they want all the time, you're oppressing them. And they are not interested. You need to understand this. The queer movement has never been interested in this being a gay dignity movement or gay equal rights or a gay civil rights movement. Because if it were, it would be about a right to privacy. It would be about the right not to be persecuted for doing in private or in small ways and modest ways in public what normal couples might do. It is about more than that. It is about the freedom to be public, it says, to just be who we are. It means every day fighting oppression, homophobia, racism, misogyny. Notice the intersectionality, the bigotry of religious hypocrites, and our own self-hatred. Do you understand what you're hearing? What is at the core of queer militancy? It means every day fighting against oppression, homophobia, racism, misogyny, the bigotry of religious hypocrites. There's people, as they would see it, like Charlie Kirk. And our own self-hatred. We have been carefully taught, it says in parentheses, to hate ourselves. See, it's not their fault they hate themselves. Society has forced them, has taught them to hate themselves for who they are. And now, of course, it says it means fighting a virus as well. And all those homo haters who are using AIDS to wipe us off the face of the earth. Being queer means leading a different sort of life. That's right, it does. It doesn't mean who you are. It is not about the mainstream, profit margins, patriotism, patriarchy, or being assimilated. It is not about executive directors, privilege, and elitism. It is about being on the margins, defining ourselves. It is about gender fuck and secrets. What's beneath the belt and deep inside the heart. It's about the night. I don't know how satanic they want this to sound, but they've done a good job. Being queer is grassroots because we know that every one of us, every body, every cunt, every heart and ass and dick is a world of pleasure waiting to be explored. Ooh, boy. So, leaning right into those 7 deadly sins, every one of us, it says, is a world of infinite possibility. Notice they have this cosmic grandiosity about themselves because they think they're the Gnostic elect. And in this case, the pursuit is unfettered sexual pleasure, including unfettered from consequences of sexual behaviors. We are an army. So again, the militancy here, it says, because we have to be. We are an army because we are so powerful. Everything here has actually spoken into weakness, so this is a projection of strength that is false. We have so much to fight for, it says in parentheses. We are the most precious of endangered species. Just let all this language marinate. This is the queer militancy movement and how it sees itself and how it thinks of itself. And the queer theory stuff all reinforces this. It says, and we are an army of lovers because it is it is we who know what love is. We are an army of lovers because it is we who know what love is. Desire and lust, too. Couldn't leave that part out, could they? We invented them. I don't think you did. We come out of the closet, face the rejection of society, face firing squads just to love each other. That's a good use of the word just. If for those of you that are collecting techniques at home, the Mott and Bailey just happened. You heard the Bailey and then just to love each other. That's the Mott. Every time we fuck, we win. That's quite the sentence. Imagine the grandiose narcissism, the wounded narcissism at the same time that has to be happening for this to be your mentality. We must fight for ourselves. No one else is going to do it. And if in that process we bring greater freedom to the world at large, then great. So that's not even their priority. It's not really about helping other people. It's about liberating themselves in their own selfish quest, which, by the way, doesn't end up working. Their lives get worse, more complicated, more miserable, and it's not society's fault, but they have no mechanism for understanding it outside of it being society's fault. But how is it society's fault? Well, it's not the friends, the allies, the queers' fault. It's normal society, straight society. It's their fault. And then you end up with Tyler Robinson saying that he has to do something about Charlie Kirk because he has so much hatred in his heart, which Charlie did not actually have at all. In parentheses, we've given so much to the world: democracy, all the arts, the concepts of love, philosophy, and the soul, just to name a few gifts from our ancient Greek dicks and f***s. So, out of parentheses, let's make every space a lesbian and gay space. Sounds like what they've been trying to do. Every street a part of our sexual geography, a city of yearning and then total satisfaction, a city and country where we can be safe and free and more. We must look at our lives and see what's best in them, see what is queer and what is straight, and let that straight chaff fall away. Remember, there is so little time. Sense of urgency always underlying militancy. And I want to be a lover of each and every one of you. Next year, we march naked. So he's talking about the Pride March where this was distributed, wrote this in 1990. The next section is titled Anger. That's another of the 7 deadly sins if you're keeping score. What we're reading here, by the way, a little interlude that touches on a recent other podcast we put out, is Left-Hand Path Magic. If you remember what that means, that's the dark magic, the satanic magic, the individualistic liberation magic, the destruction of everything for the possibility of a shining either rise to infamous power or fame or riches or glory, paired with the possibility of maybe liberating others along the way. This is dark, black, satanic, left-hand path magic is what you're actually hearing. We heard it from Alexander Dugin in terms of communism, fascism, and his desire for the Gnostic, and now we're hearing it from the queer. This is the same stuff. This is why the Duginistic woke right is itself a queer movement, as a matter of fact, and will become a queer militant movement. Their definition of queer, meaning that which is outside the norm, that should be inside the norm, and that which is tolerated, that shouldn't be tolerated, is just different. The strong sisters, it says, this is in quotes, the strong sisters told the brothers that there were 2 important things to remember about the coming revolutions. The first is that we will get our asses kicked. The second is that we will win. End quote. I'm angry, he says. I'm angry for being condemned to death by strangers saying you deserve to die. End quote. AIDS is the cure. Fury erupts when a Republican woman wearing thousands of dollars of garments and jewelry minces by the police lines, shaking her head, chuckling and wagging her finger at us like we are recalcitrant children making absurd demands and throwing temper tantrums when they aren't met. Angry while Joseph agonizes over $8,000 It says, I'm just going to read the words that are here. There's a typo, it appears. Angry while Joseph agonizes over $8,000, a over for AZT, which might keep him alive a little longer and which makes him sicker than the disease he's diagnosed with. Cough, cough, Fauci, cough, cough. Angry as I listen to a man tell me that after changing his will 5 times, he's running out of people to leave things to. All of his best friends are dead. Angry when we stand in a sea of quilt panels or go to a candlelight march or attend yet another memorial service. I will not march silently with a fucking candle, and I want to take that goddamned quilt and wrap myself in it and furiously rend it in my hair and curse every God, every religion ever created. I refuse to accept a creation that cuts people down in the 3rd decade of their life. You don't want to go that way, by the way, if you're on the right. Do not let anger consume you. There's so much here that touches what we're experiencing now. Don't go that way. It's queer. He goes on. It is cruel and vile and meaningless, and everything I have in me rails against the absurdity, and I raise my face to the clouds, and a ragged laugh that sounds more demonic than joyous erupts from my throat, and tears stream down my face, and if this disease doesn't kill me, I may just die of frustration. My feet pound the streets, and Peter's hands are chained to a pharmaceutical company's reception desk, while the receptionist looks on in horror, and Eric's body lies rotting in a Brooklyn cemetery, and I'll never hear his flute resounding off the walls of the meeting house again. So you hear the personal stories, the personal damage, and the anger that's coming from this. And we always have this choice. I keep saying it. We have a choice between catharsis and civilization. Within catharsis is the giving over to the pathos of the left-hand path and deciding to destroy everything, even if all we have is destruction to revel in. Civilization requires something else. The queer militancy movement took its path, the cathartic path. 35 years later, this is where we are. Do we want that for the next generation? No, we don't. He says, and I see the old people in Tompkins Square Park huddled in their long wool coats in June to keep out the cold they perceive is there and to cling to whatever little life has left to offer them. I'm reminded of the people who strip and stand before a mirror each night before they go to bed and search their bodies for any mark that might not have been there yesterday, a mark that this scourge has visited them. I'm angry when the newspapers call us victims and sound alarms that it, meaning AIDS, I assume, might soon spread to the general population. So there's that sense of otherness, that isolation, that breaking away from the whole that precedes militancy and radicalism and violence. And I want to scream, who the fuck am I? And I want to scream at New York Hospital with its yellow plastic bags marked isolation linen, ropa infecciosa, sorry. I actually do know how to speak Spanish, but isn't it funny that I mess it up? And its orderlies in latex gloves and surgical masks skirting the bed as if its occupant will suddenly leap out and douse them with blood and semen, giving them too the plague. And I'm angry at straight people who sit smugly wrapped in their self-protective coat of monogamy and heterosexuality, confident that this disease has nothing to do with them because it only happens to them. The same themes, the isolation, the otherliness, and the anger directed at the class, smugly wrapped in their self-protective coat of monogamy and heterosexuality. And the teenage boys, he says, who upon spotting my silence equals death button, begin chanting, it's gonna die. And I wonder, who taught them this? Enveloped in fury and fear, I remain silent while my buttock mocks me every step of the way, and the anger I assume felt is what it should say, when a television program on the quilt gives profiles of the dead, and the list begins with a baby, a teenage girl who got a blood transfusion, an elderly Baptist minister, and his wife when they finally show a gay man. He's described as someone who knowingly infected teenage male prostitutes with the virus. What else can you expect from a fat? I'm angry. So that's a dark... It's understandable. It's something that can be sympathized with. What does sympathy mean? Well, the pathy part is pathos, is feeling. Sim, S-Y-M, is the same sim that's in symphony. Symphony, symphony. Phony means sound. Symphony means sounds together. So sympathy means feelings together, right? Having or sharing feelings together. So sympathy is definitely something we can have, especially given how the AIDS crisis was so badly managed. And we can see that the bigotry of the general population didn't help that situation. And we can see how that turned them to anger. This would be a great lesson, by the way, for those of you who are still on the left, who might stumble on this or are leaving the left. that the toxicity that you are engaging in, because this anger is perpetuating a cycle of abuse that is now generating these same feelings, which you take as the ground for your anger, your violence, your militancy in a young generation on the right. And you might be tempted to blame them, to say they deserve whatever suffering they have or whatever, or that they're not suffering, and to minimize it. But you need to understand that this is a cycle of abuse that's going back and forth and back and forth. And if you are on the left today, you are the perpetrators. Yes, you were perpetrated against, but the breaking of a cycle of abuse starts with you. So if you're on the left, still leaving the left, you might consider this. These feelings I just read of anger are shocking to me, not because of the circumstances of 1990 and the decade before regarding AIDS and the horribleness of it, and including the bigotry. They're shocking to me because I'm seeing the left that suffered these things go from being the victim to the perpetrator that is now victimizing another generation. And this cycle will continue, Hatfield's and McCoy's, friends and enemies, until we all grow the fuck up and say stop. No more of this extremism, no more of the friend-enemy distinction. Next section is titled Queer Artists. Since time began, so notice this grand mythology, right? There's a grand myth to all of these kind of Gnostic perspectives. The Nazis had a grand myth. Here the queers have a grand myth of how they've already heard it in this so far, these great contributions to society, and they're going to be snuffed out. The Nazis believed that they had the greatest contributions to culture, whether it's music, whether it's literature, whether it's art. And then World War I came along and smashed Germany's standing and destroyed Germany's opportunities, and the great culture would be lost. And Hitler wrote probably a quarter of Mein Kampf about the desire to have the greatness of culture. You could argue, badly, incorrectly, that Hitler's motivation was to restore German high culture. He had other motivations too, but he really was possessed by this. So he has this grand myth of German cultural contribution and status, and that being smashed out by this awful world that doesn't appreciate it and doesn't like it, and doesn't like the Germans in particular, and he's going to restore their pride. Isn't it interesting that the marches that this was written for are called Pride? Queer artists. Since time began, the world has been inspired by the work of queer artists. In exchange, there has been suffering, there has been pain, there has been violence. So notice this sense of betrayal. We've given and given and given to you, and all you did was piss on us and spit on us. Boy, I can feel that personally right now, but it doesn't turn me to evil, because I know that we have to be better than that, that civilization depends on us being human in our faculties, not leaning into our so-called humanity and sympathy and empathy, but understanding that we override our base impulses, including senses of betrayal. He says, throughout history, society has struck a bargain with its queer citizens. They may pursue creative careers if they do it discreetly. Through the arts, queers are productive, lucrative, entertaining, and even uplifting. These are the clear-cut and useful byproducts of what is otherwise considered antisocial behavior. In cultured circles, queers may quietly coexist with an otherwise disapproving power elite. That sense of betrayal is so deep in the queer militancy program. At the forefront of the most... So with the sense of betrayal, by the way, there's also the sense that if the people just changed with their regards to whatever queer people want to do, it's like a hostage situation. If they just changed, if they just stopped spouting their hate, so to speak, then we could have all these benefits and more, and then there wouldn't be this betrayal, this unfairness. That's the mentality. We're the poor tortured artist who's providing so much good and only getting pain in return. So of course we're angry. And that's the same motivations that we're seeing to the degree that we know the story from Charlie Kirk's Killer. Not quite exactly, not about the artist, but about this idea that they have this intrinsic value they're bringing to society that's being suppressed by the so-called hate speech of people who actually love them enough to tell them the truth, that queer as a political movement and queer as a set of projects on the self, including the physical body, are a disastrous dead end. At the forefront of the most recent campaign to bash queer artists, it says, is Jesse Helms, arbiter of all that is decent, moral, Christian, and American. That's spelled America with a K. For Helms, queer art is quite simply a threat to the world. In his imaginings, heterosexual culture is too fragile to bear up the admission of human or sexual diversity. Well, this is a weird question, right, within queer theory, because it never understands the difference between presenting diversity and presenting perversion and fetish. That same public-private line they are not able to draw. Quite simply, he says, the structure of power in the Judeo-Christian world has made procreation its cornerstone. Families having children assures customers for the nation's products and a workforce to produce them, as well as a built-in family system to care for its ill, reducing the expense of public healthcare systems. Ta-da! Yes, he was inspired by Karl Marx. All caps. All non-procreative behavior is considered a threat. The caps end. From homosexuality to birth control to abortion as an option, it is not enough, according to the religious right, to consistently advertise procreation and heterosexuality. It is also necessary to destroy any alternatives. It is not art Helms is after, it is our lives, that last part being in all caps. Art is the last safe place for lesbians and gay men to thrive. Helms knows this and has developed a program to purge queers from the one arena they have been permitted to contribute to our shared culture. Helms is advocating a world free from diversity or dissent. It is easy to imagine why that might feel more comfortable to those in charge of such a world. It is also easy to envision an American, again with the K instead of the C, an American landscape flattened by such power. Helms should just ask for what he is hinting at: state-sponsored art, art of totalitarianism, art that speaks only in Christian terms, art which supports the goals of those in power, art that matches the sofas in the Oval Office. I'll just go ahead and point out, especially under the Biden administration, that they became the thing they hate. Well, when you adopt the friend-enemy distinction, you become the thing you hate. Try to avoid becoming the thing you hate. Ask for what you want, he says, Jesse, so that men and women of conscience can mobilize against it, as we do against the human rights violations of other countries and fight to free our own country's dissidents. You could hear the same message essentially from the group that interacted with the young man who killed Charlie Kirk for mostly the same reasons. Very similar. This queer militancy movement has a mindset. It is not random mentally ill, psychopathic people. The ideology itself, rooted on its queer friend-enemy distinction of ally versus bigot, is actually itself deranging. It is creating functional psychopaths out of otherwise normal and vulnerable and often tender people. If you're queer, this is a section. Queers are under siege. Again, the language of battle, but this idea of being under siege means that you're trapped as well, with no way out. Queers are being attacked on all fronts, and I'm afraid it's okay with us. In 1969, there were 50 queer bashings in the month of May alone. Violent attacks, 3,720 men, women, and children died of AIDS in the same month, caused by a more violent attack. Government inaction, so the thinking that the government's going to solve your problem, but it put Fauci in charge, so it made it worse, of course, rooted in society's growing homophobia. This is institutionalized violence, perhaps more dangerous to the existence of queers, existential language, perhaps more dangerous to the existence of queers because the attackers are faceless. We allow these attacks by our own continued lack of action against them. So the queer militancy movement says they're going to take action. They're sick of candlelight vigils and writing pieces and so on. There's going to be marches, and they march naked, and then it's going to get worse and worse and worse even as they make advances with things that they ask for that are reasonable or just beyond the edge of reasonable or somewhat beyond the pale. They eventually come across the fact that their slope is slippery. They ask for things that they cannot have, that no healthy, sane society, especially one that wishes to raise a healthy sane next generation can tolerate. We allow these attacks by our own continued lack of action against them. AIDS has affected the straight world, and now they're blaming us for AIDS and using it as a way to justify their violence against us. They don't want us anymore. They will beat us up, rape us, and kill us before they will continue to live with us. I want you to notice that there's a big they there, which is all of straight society, when in fact that the things that it's talking about are overwhelmingly committed by a small number of people that are being generalized through this idea of friend-enemy complicity to be all straights. What will it take for this not to be okay, he asks. Feel some rage. To lean into wrath, another of the deadly sins. If rage doesn't empower you, try fear. If that doesn't work, try panic. So the friend-enemy distinction is at the bottom. The friend-enemy distinction of the existential condition that generates the friend-enemy distinction, I should say, is at the bottom of the militancy movement. And when does it become militant? It becomes militant when it feels like it can't make action through anything other than violence. The next section is titled Shout It, with an exclamation mark. Be proud. Do whatever you need to do to tear yourself away from your customary state of acceptance. Be free. Shout. In 1969, that's Stonewall, by the way, queers fought back. In 1990, queers say, okay. Next year, will we be here? Again with the existential appeal. The next section is titled, I hate, with 3 dots, the so-called ellipsis. I hate Jesse Helms. I hate Jesse Helms so much, he says. I'd rejoice if he dropped down dead. If someone killed him, I'd consider it his own fault. Just let those words echo for a second. If someone killed him, I'd consider it his own fault. I'd rejoice if he dropped down dead. The queer militancy movement did not stay with angry, city-dwelling gay people who were facing, if you want to say that the AIDS crisis was this legitimate source for sympathy, the legitimate source for anger in their community, etc., and the homophobia, and the bigotry, and the bashing, if you want to say it was all legitimate, not a lot of any of that happens anymore. But the anger didn't go away. It multiplied. It spread. Such that when Charlie Kirk was murdered, we all watched the internet erupt on the left, but not all of the left. Parts of the left, the radical militarized left, erupt with exactly that paragraph. We watched the celebration from those same ugly corners when that Luigi guy shot that healthcare CEO. Isn't it funny that it's a healthcare CEO? We're looking at this too. This is poison. This is 35 years. And as things have changed and as they made advances in many regards according to the stated aims of their movement, the nice Mott version, not the Bailey activist real version that people wouldn't tolerate at all at first or eventually, it's not that their anger got less, it got more. And that's the sign that you're dealing with a radical, detached ideology behind what's actually going on. So queer militancy already was talking like this. People are like, oh, they've just turned violent. Bullshit. They've been violent for decades. They've been violent. If you read Frantz Fanon, which he wrote Wretched of the Earth in 1962, if you read Marx, they were violent in the 1840s. They've been violent since the French Revolution, and before them, the secret societies that preceded all of that were violent for their causes too. Radicals tend to be this way, and they become hate cults. So I'll read that again. I hate Jesse Helms, he says. I hate Jesse Helms so much. I'd rejoice if he dropped down dead. If someone killed him, I'd consider it his own fault. I hate Ronald Reagan too, because he mass murdered my people for 8 years. Now, bear in mind that by June of 1990, Ronald Reagan is no longer president and he's not in good health. But to be honest, I hate him even more for eulogizing Ryan White without first admitting his guilt, without begging forgiveness for Ryan's death and for the deaths of tens of thousands of other PWAs, most of them queer. I hate him for making a mockery of our grief. So Ronald Reagan had stepped up to eulogize a victim of this crisis, and it made them madder. Because they aren't looking for healing, they're looking for reasons to be mad. It's like that meme with the guy who says, I have a problem, and somebody says, here's a solution, and hands him a book, and next frame he's setting the book on fire, and he says, I don't want solutions, I want to be mad. I hate the fucking Pope, it says. And I hate John fucking Cardinal fucking O'Connor, it says. And I hate the whole fucking Catholic Church, it says. The same goes for the military, and especially for America, again with the K, America's law enforcement officials, the cops. State-sanctioned sadists who brutalize street transvestites, prostitutes, and queer prisoners. So he couldn't pick very sympathetic characters there, could he? And you kind of understand how when you step into this zone and you've allied yourself with people who are not exactly great, then you're setting yourself up on a cycle of more and more radicalization, right? So again, with the friend-enemy distinction as the criterion for your politics, you're inviting yourself to just get madder and madder and madder till you come off the hinges. He says, I also hate the medical and mental health establishments, particularly the psychiatrist who convinced me not to have sex with men for 3 years until we, meaning he, could make me bisexual rather than queer. I also hate the education profession for its share in driving thousands of queer teens to suicide every year. Okay, so you've heard these stories from the one side, but now flip it around. You need to understand what's radicalizing us now. And it's that they have taken over out of this militancy and anger, out of their relentless, angry pursuit of power that they then took and abused, as all abusers do. And now it's us being radicalized. We could write these same things. We could write these same things in 2025. I hate the medical and mental health establishments for encouraging the transition of kids and lying to us about COVID-19, blah, blah, blah. I hate the education profession for brainwashing our youth, driving young people to transition and suicide, violence, hate, division. We are just as vulnerable. This is why the old saying is there, but for the grace of God go I. But it's not just for the grace of God and our luck and our circumstances. It's also because we've chosen sanity and civilization over anger and destruction. And this is a fight that gets harder and harder to fight the longer and longer it takes to push back on something intolerable. He says, I hate the respectable art world and the entertainment industry and the mainstream media, especially the New York Times. Isn't that an interesting thing? I hate, in fact, it says, I hate every sector of the straight establishment in this country, the worst of whom actively want all queers dead, the best of whom will never stick their necks out to keep us alive. I hate straight people who think they have anything intelligent to say about, quote, outing. I hate straight people who think stories about themselves are, quote, universal, but stories about us are only about homosexuality. I hate straight recording artists who make their careers off queer people, then attack us, then act hurt when we get angry, and then deny having wronged us rather than apologize for it. I hate straight people who say, quote, I don't see why you feel the need to wear those buttons and t-shirts. I don't go around telling the whole world I'm straight, end quote. I hate that in 12 years of public education, I was never taught about queer people. I hate that I grew up thinking I was the only queer in the world. And I hate even more that most queer kids still grow up the same way. I hate that I was tormented by other kids for being a but more than that, I was taught to feel ashamed for being the object of their cruelty, taught to feel it was my fault. Notice how he took that sentiment and reversed it with Jesse Helms. I hate that the Supreme Court of this country says it's okay to criminalize me because of how I make love. I hate that so many straight people are so concerned about my goddamned sex life. I hate that so many twisted straight people become parents while I have to fight like hell to be allowed to be a father. I hate straights. So there's your invitation into the friend-enemy distinction. in the radicalization pipeline. All of these frustrations, these senses of alienation, these pieces of isolation, of slights and betrayals and injustice, framed now in a Gnostic, imprisoning way and turned to class hatred. He doesn't hate people, he hates straights. Where are you, sisters? I wear my pink triangle everywhere. I do not lower my voice in public when talking about lesbian love or sex. I always tell people I'm a lesbian. I've been misgendering this character the whole time. It is a lesbian, an angry, angry woman. I don't wait to be asked about my boyfriend. I don't say it's no one's business. I don't do this for straight people. Most of them don't know what the pink triangle even means. I already said that I don't. Most of them couldn't care less that my girlfriend and I are totally in love or having a fight on the street. Most of them don't notice us no matter what we do. Now, welcome to city life, lady. Most of them don't notice us no matter what we do. I do what I do to reach other lesbians. I do what I do because I don't want lesbians to assume I'm a straight girl. I'm out all the time, everywhere, because I want to reach you. Maybe you'll notice me. Maybe we'll start talking. Maybe we'll exchange numbers. Maybe we'll become friends. Maybe we won't say a word, but our eyes will meet, and I will imagine you naked, sweating, open-mouthed, your back arched as I am fucking you. They couldn't keep it from being weird, could they? Couldn't keep it from being weird, could they? And this is queer theory. And we'll be happy to know we aren't the only ones in the world. We'll be happy because we found each other without saying a word, maybe just for a moment, but no. You won't wear a pink triangle on that linen lapel. You won't meet my eyes if I flirt with you on the street. You avoid me on the job because I'm too out. You chastise me in bars because I'm too political. I don't think this lady understands that she's a psycho bitch. You ignore me in public because I bring too much attention to my lesbianism. But then you want me to be your lover. You want me to be your friend. You want me to love you, support you, fight for our right to exist. Where are you? You talk about invisibility and then retreat to your homes to nest with your lovers or carouse in a bar with pals and stumble home in a cab and sit silently and politely by, while your family, your boss, your neighbors, your public servants distort and disfigure us, deride us and punish us. Then home again and you feel like screaming. Then you pad your anger with a relationship or a career or a party with other dicks like you, and still you wonder why we can't find each other, why you feel lonely, angry, alienated. Get up. Wake up, sisters. 2 exclamation marks, all in caps. Notice that alienation thing. Your life is in your hands. So then you've now maximized the emotional sense of alienation. Here comes the cult game. You get them feeling vulnerable and alienated, and that they're not doing their part. That's the emotional game we just played. And now you have a choice. Your life is in your hands. When I risk it all to be out, I risk it for both of us. See the moral elevation? When I risk it all, and it works, which it often does, if you would try it, I benefit and so do you. When it doesn't work, I suffer and you do not. So here the, reluctant, self-sacrificial hero. But girl, you can't stop waiting for other dicks to make the world safe for you. Stop waiting for a better, more lesbian future. The revolution could be here if we started it. Where are you, sisters? I'm trying to find you. I'm trying to find you. How come I only see you on Gay Pride Day? Notice how things have changed since 1990. We're out. Where the fuck are you? Next section. When anyone assaults you for being queer, it's queer bashing, right? A crowd of 50 people exit a gay bar as it closes. Across the street, some straight boys are shouting f***s and throwing beer bottles at the gathering, which outnumbers them by 10 to 1. 3 queers make a move to respond, getting no support from the group. Why did a group this size allow themselves to be sitting ducks? Tompkins Square Park, Labor Day. At an annual outdoor concert drag show, a group of gay men were harassed by teens carrying sticks. In the midst of thousands of gay men and lesbians, these straight boys beat 2 gay men to the ground, then stood around triumphantly, laughing amongst themselves. The MC was alerted and warned the crowd from the stage. Quote, "You girls better be careful. When you dress it up, drives the boys crazy." as if it were a practical joke inspired by what the victims were wearing rather than a pointed attack on anyone and everyone at the event. What would it have taken for that crowd to stand up to its attackers? After James Zippalordi, an openly gay man, was murdered in cold blood on Staten Island this winter, a single demonstration was held in his protest. Only 100 people came. When Yusef Hawkins, a black youth, was shot to death for being on white turf in Bensonhurst, African Americans marched through that neighborhood in large numbers again and again. A black person was killed because he was black, and people of color throughout the city recognized it and acted on it. The bullet that hit Hawkins was meant for a black man, any black man. Do most gays and lesbians think that the knife that punctured Zippalordi's heart was meant only for him? Now, we got to pause here. Listen to this rhetoric and think about it. This is bringing the existential threat to the class. So if you are a member of the class or care about or will advocate for that class, you are under this same threat. That's what we're hearing here. I need you to flip this around too. I need you to understand both sides of this. When we think and freak out that and believe that the bullet that was meant for Charlie Kirk was meant for any conservative, first of all, it's not true. He was really, really, really prominent. But we have to, even to the degree that that statement is true enough, we have to be careful not to take the invitation into the tribal identity politics, friend-enemy distinction territory. We have to be careful about this because we've spent 35 years since this document was distributed at a New York Pride Parade, watching what happens when that logic is allowed to continue to mature. And we should not be the bearers of that logic. Remember Solzhenitsyn's words. Let the evil come into the world, let it triumph even, but not through me. You have to be, in every case, at every turn, the person who says no to the one ring. You have to, it's not that there is a one ring. One ring is a kind of temptation. And all of us have to say no to it every time it shows up. What does the one ring do? I'm talking about Lord of the Rings, if you're lost. Brings them together in the darkness and binds them. This is what we must avoid. This is what we must not fall into. We're reading this logic. You can hear the rhetoric. You can say, oh, those queers did this and that, and the queer movement and the militancy. But there before the grace of God and our better wisdom go we too. It's very important not to fixate on the darkness and radicalize ourselves, because the radicalization will play out the same for every group that steps into it if the logic is allowed to play out far enough. Again, we talk about the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf is tempted by it. Galadriel is tempted by it. Boromir is tempted by it. And in each case, they talk about what it would be like if they had it. Boromir would become a great warrior, or he'd deliver it not truly to his father, who would become the great warrior and lead Minas Tirith to battle and win against Sauron. Gandalf says all of the great things, or thinks of all of the great things that he could possibly accomplish with it, and realizes he would become terrible. Galadriel says that she would do all these fantastic things and become loved and feared and hated. We all have to resist this temptation. Those people, Gandalf and Galadriel in the book, are literally called the wise. They are members of the wise. There are not that many of the wise. Wisdom says, not this way. The temptation is there, and so much good could be done by binding together in darkness and anger and hatred and wrath and revenge and to catharsis for all those negative feelings. And wisdom says, not this way. And here we are at the doorway of invitation to the same thing. And that invitation is going to be given to us again and again and again and again and again. That it's not going to be easy for us to fight for civilization and resist this temptation. The story in Lord of the Rings is the closer you get to the source of its making, the more it consumes you, the more it takes over all your thought, to where in the end Frodo himself sent to the cracks of doom specifically to throw the damn thing in the fire couldn't do it and claimed it. It completely conquered him. The closer you get to the source, the more intense it gets and the more overwhelming that temptation. This is an important lesson, but let's carry on. The straight world, she says, has so convinced us that we are helpless and deserving victims of the violence against us that queers are immobilized when faced with a threat. Be outraged. Do you understand? The straight world, it's not our fault, external locus of control, external enemy, has so convinced us, this is demiurge false consciousness, that we are helpless and deserving victims of the violence against us, framing, that queers are immobilized when faced with a threat. Be outraged. These attacks must not be tolerated. Do something. Again, pause and let this be a mirror. Let this be a mirror. Charlie Kirk got shot. Be outraged. These attacks must not be tolerated. Do something. Recognize that any act of aggression against any member of our community is an attack on every member of the community. The more we allow homophobes to inflict violence, terror, and fear on our lives, the more frequently and ferociously we will be the object of their hatred. How many people came out in the wake of this and said that 2 weeks have gone by and we have done nothing? All the left has learned is that they can get away with violence. You're immeasurably valuable, because unless you start believing that, it can easily be taken from you. If you know how to If you know how to gently and efficiently immobilize your attacker, then by all means do it. The idea here is obviously you cannot. You're going to have to do it with violence. If you lack those skills, then think about Think about gouging out his fucking eyes, slamming his nose back into his brain, slashing his throat with a broken bottle. Do whatever you can, whatever you have to save your life. Why queer? Queer. Do we really have to use that word? By the way, why queer is written backwards here. It's literally written the letters backwards. Then it says queer. Do we really have to use that word? It's trouble. Every gay person has his or her own take on it. I'm going to pause actually before I get into this. I want to go back to that really violent paragraph. So it's come to this crescendo. You feel all this frustration. You've been pulled into the emotions and the cult-like rhetoric. You're going to do something. And then it turns directly to militant violence. And again, just pause to hold up a mirror, right? Just pause to hold up a mirror. Do whatever you can, whatever you have to save your life. Here's James's advice. The people who are telling you that are the same as this angry queer. The same. Don't listen to those people, not just when they say it. Stop listening to them entirely until they calm the hell down, because this is drip feed poison into your mind. And we know from watching this community for 35 years where it goes if we take that. And you might say, it went to them getting all this power. Brother, their power is going to tear civilization apart, and we're all going to be in really bad ways if that works. You are not going to do it better when you're led by your anger and your wrath and this belief in an existential crisis that can't be solved by any other means than a race to the bottom. So why queer, written backwards? Queer. Do we really have to use that word? It's trouble. Every gay person has his or her own take on it. Remember that St. Foucault defining queer is 5 years after this document. Teresa de Laurentis defining or naming queer theory was in the following year after this. So this is before queer theory is queer theory. So the debate at the time in these communities was whether or not to embrace that word as an act of strategic resistance. So they were stepping into that space. For some, it means strange and eccentric and kind of mysterious. That's okay. We like that. But some gay girls and boys don't. They think they're more normal than strange. And for others, queer conjures up those awful memories of adolescent suffering. Queer. It's forcibly bittersweet and quaint at best, wakening weakening and painful at worst. Couldn't we just use gay instead? It's a much brighter word, and isn't it synonymous with happy? When will you militants grow up and get over the novelty of being different? Why queer? That's a section. Well, yes, gay is great. It has its place, but when a lot of lesbians and gay men wake up in the morning, we feel angry and disgusted, not gay. So we've chosen to call ourselves queer, using queer as a way of reminding us how we are perceived by the rest of the world. It's a way of telling ourselves that we don't have to be witty and charming people who keep our lives discreet and marginalized in the straight world. We use queer as gay men loving lesbians and lesbian loving being queer. So strategic defiance, but it's literally a way to keep themselves angry and radical. I don't know that the word dissident for the dissident right is quite as strong, but dissident and dissident right and queer left mean the same thing. Queer, unlike gay, doesn't mean male. Actually, what does dissident right and queer left? What do those dissident and queer mean the same thing? What do they mean? Woke. They mean woke. And you just heard it. Oh, we're navigating the straight world. That's the social demiurge that's holding them down, that they can't be themselves, is the whole theme of this thing. And when spoken to other gays and lesbians, it's a way of suggesting we close ranks and forget temporarily our individual differences, friend-enemy distinction, because we face a more insidious common enemy. Yeah, queer can be a rough word, but it's also a sly and ironic weapon we can steal from the homophobe's hands and use against him. The logic of evil is fully on display here. No sex police. For anyone to say that coming out is not part of the revolution is missing the point. Positive sexual images and what they manifest saves lives because they affirm those lives and make it possible for the people to attempt to live as self-loving instead of self-loathing. So there's the logic on the friend side of the friend-enemy distinction. That's the thing that they've taken so far that now this pushback is happening. As the famous Black is Beautiful slogan changed many lives, so does Read My Lips affirm queerness in the face of hatred and invisibility as displayed in a recent governmental study of suicides that states at least 1/3 of all teen suicides are queer kids. This is further exemplified by the rise in HIV transmission among those under 21. We are most hated as queers for our sexualness. That is, our physical contact with the same sex. Our sexuality and sexual expression are what makes us most susceptible to physical violence. Our difference, our otherness, our uniqueness can either paralyze or politicize us. Hopefully, the majority of us will not let it kill us. You have to understand how the militant mind thinks. And it's all rooted in this constant injury of the perception of an existential threat. And that needs to be a mirror for us now. Queer space. Why in the world do we let heteros into queer clubs? Who gives a fuck if they like us because we really know how to make a party? Or we really know how to party, all caps. We have to in order to blow off the steam they make us feel all the time. So now, I guess gay parties are fun because they have to be able to have a lot of fun in order to blow off the steam of being around straight people. Everything's somebody else's fault in this poisoned mindset. They make out wherever they please and take up too much room on the dance floor doing ostentatious couples dances. They wear their heterosexuality like a keep out sign or like a deed of ownership. Why the fuck do we tolerate them when they invade our space like it's their right? Why do we let them shove heterosexuality, a weapon their world wields against us? That's a strange way to see the form of attraction that leads to babies. A weapon their world wields against us right in our faces in the few public spots where we can be sexy with each other and not fear attack. It's time to stop letting the straight people make all the rules. Let's start by posting this sign outside every queer club and bar. Rules of conduct for straight people. 1. Keep your display of affection, kissing, hand-holding, embracing to a minimum. Your sexuality is unwanted and offensive to many here. 2. If you must slow dance, be as inconspicuous as possible. 3. Do not gawk or stare at lesbians or gay men, especially bull dykes or drag queens. We are not your entertainment. 4. If you cannot comfortably deal with someone of the same sex making a pass at you, get out. 5. Do not flaunt your heterosexuality. Be discreet. Risk being mistaken for a leslie or a homo. 6. If you feel these rules are unfair, go fight homophobia in straight clubs. Or 7. Go fuck yourself. You can hear, again, the friend-enemy distinction, the anger, and we need to hold up the mirror. We need to figure out ways to get along, even understanding that getting along with militants is actually not possible and lines have to be drawn. But the problem here is that this author has seen all straight people as militants against her and her kind, the friend-enemy distinction. That should be avoided. I hate straights. That's another section. I think it might be the last one. I have friends. Some of them are straight. Year after year, I see my straight friends. Notice that I have friends that are straight. Like I have a gay friend thing, right? I want to see them, to see how they're doing, to add newness to our long and complicated histories, to experience some continuity. Year after year, I continue to realize that the facts of my life are irrelevant to them, and that I am only half listened to, that I am an appendage to the doings of a greater world, a world of power and privilege, of the laws of installation, a world of exclusion. There's your Gnostic framing. That's not true, argue my straight friends. There is one certainty in the politics of power. That's not a good way to think about the world, by the way. Those left out of it beg for inclusion, while the insiders claim that they already are. Isn't it funny how they made their brand inclusion then? Isn't it funny how they made their brand inclusion and used it to exclude? Again, this is a cycle of abuse. Woke is a cycle of abuse. They felt abused, so they seized the means of production and began to abuse people because they are perpetuating the cycle of abuse. And it stops when we decide to stop. Men do it to women, whites do it to blacks, and everyone does it to queers. Well, guess what? 35 years later, the shoe's on the other fucking foot, isn't it, lady? The main dividing line, both conscious and unconscious, is procreation, and that magic word, family. They really don't like family. Frequently, the ones we are born into disown us when they find out who we really are, and to make matters worse, we are prevented from having our own. Nothing's really preventing you. We are punished, insulted, cut off, and treated like seditionaries in terms of child rearing, both damned if we try and damned if we abstain. It's as if the propagation of the species is such a fragile directive that without enforcing it as if it were an agenda, humankind would melt back into the primeval ooze. Well, it turns out we got some problems with birth rates right now. I hate having to convince straight people that lesbians and gays live in a war zone. Again, with that rhetoric, that we're surrounded by bomb blasts only we seem to hear. Maybe you're perceiving them in your mind. And that our bodies and souls are heaped high, dead from fright or bashed or raped, dying of grief or disease, stripped of our personhood. Notice the rhetoric that leads to militancy. I hate straight people who can't listen to queer anger without saying, hey, all straight people aren't like that. I'm straight too, you know. As if their egos don't get enough stroking or protection in this arrogant heterosexist world. So notice when the ally thing, the friend side of the friend-enemy distinction extends into, would-be ally-enemy territory, the relationship's purely abusive. That's just a predecessor to what's going to happen if they actually take power, and it's a predecessor to what will happen if we adopt the same mindset. When these people decided that they were going to take power, and they were already abusing their friends who were helping them, it should have followed that we realized that they were going to abuse everybody. If they're abusing their friends who are actually helping them, what are they going to do with strangers or people they designate truly as enemies? Big problem. Why must we take care of them in the midst of our just anger? Anger's always trying to justify itself. Sometimes it's just, usually it's not. It's always trying to claim its own justification, though. Why must we take care of them in the midst of our just anger brought on by their fucked up society? Why add the reassurance of course, I don't mean you. You don't act that way. Let them figure out for themselves whether they deserve to be included in our anger. But of course, that would mean listening to our anger, which they almost never do. They deflect it by saying, I'm not like that, or now look who's generalizing, or you'll catch more flies with honey, or if you focus on the negative, you just give out more power, or you're not the only one in the world who's suffering. They say, don't yell at me, I'm on your side, or I think you're overreacting, or boy, you're bitter. Again, all this is a signal that people that adopt this kind of mindset are going to abuse the people who help them eventually, along with everybody else even more. They've taught us, she says, that good queers don't get mad. They've taught us so well. Imagine if that sentence was, they've taught us that good conservatives don't get mad. They've taught us so well that we not only hide our anger from them, we hide it from each other. We even hide it from ourselves. All caps. We hide it with substance abuse and suicide and overachieving in hope of proving our worth. They bash us and stab us and shoot us and bomb us in ever-increasing numbers, and still we freak out when angry queers carry banners or signs that say, bash back. Well, okay, there's your experiment in what happens when you decide to accept the cycle of abuse and return fire. 35 years later, are we happy with how that worked out? No. Are they happy? No, they're killing people. They're so unhappy, as a matter of fact. For the last decade, they let us die in droves, and still we thank President Bush for planting a fucking tree. Applaud him for likening PWAs to car accident victims who refuse to wear seatbelts. Let yourself be angry. Again, invitation into the pathos. The left-hand path depends on the pathos. The Gnostic temptation depends on the pathos plus the superiority. Let yourself be angry that the price of our visibility is the constant threat of violence, anti-queer violence to which practically every segment of this society contributes. Let yourself feel angry that, all caps, there is no place in this country where we are safe. No place where we are not targeted for hatred and attack, the self-hatred, the suicide of the closet. The next time some straight person comes down on you for being angry, tell them that until things change, you don't need any more evidence that the world turns at your expense. You don't need to see only hetero couple grocery shopping on TV. You don't want any more baby pictures shoved in your face until you can have or keep your own. No more weddings, showers, anniversaries, please, unless they are our own brothers and sisters celebrating. And tell them not to dismiss you by saying you have rights, you have privileges, you're overreacting, or you have a victim mentality. Tell them, all caps, go away from me until you can change. End quote. Go away and try on a world without the brave, strong queers that are its backbone, that are its guts and brains and souls. Go tell them, go away until they have spent a month walking hand in hand in public with someone of the same sex. After they survive that, then you'll hear what they have to say about queer anger. Otherwise, tell them to shut up and listen. So, like I said, this document is allegedly the origin point of the queer militancy movement. It fits within the broader picture. Queer theory is deeply informed by this, and this document is informed by the early queer theory, as you can hear. And I find it, very important to help people understand why we're in this situation where we're seeing so much violence. As I often say, trans violence is violence. Why we're seeing so much anger, so much militancy, why we're seeing them arm up, why this is the big story, why we keep seeing actually attacks and murders, and why the first guess people have now is that the attacker was probably either queer or Muslim. I want to help people understand. I want people to understand this, and I want to help them understand this, that this mentality is comprehensible, that it lends itself to predictions, that when we find a group like Armed Queers SLC, that we can understand the things that they're saying and make predictions about when things or how things are brewing that will go off the rails. All of this is comprehensible. That's really one of my big messages. People ask me, James, what do we do? Well, the first step to doing anything is to understand it. And I'm just going to be blunt. A lot of people haven't tried very hard. I get it every day. I try to explain some of this stuff on social media, and people come back at me with, James, you're making it too complicated. They're just mentally ill. No, they're mentally ill with an ideology. And in fact, if that FBI document I mentioned bears anything out, radicals are only mentally ill about 25% of the time, according to what the FBI reports in that document about radical extremism. It's not the mental illness always driving it. There are other factors. It's not the chemical environment always driving it. There are other factors. The isolation, the shame, the sense of alienation, I think, is actually really huge. The belief that they are contributing in so many positive ways that are disrespected, that feeling of betrayal. These things are at the root. And the challenge we face is to figure out, how do we draw the lines that we need to draw to keep our children safe, to keep society flourishing and successful, while also not stepping into the place where we're recreating those same conditions in a way that has bubbled up this militancy in the first place, which, by the way, the genie's not going back in the bottle. If the conditions aren't at least somewhat reasonable, the militancy is going to go off the charts. And there is a reasonable position to have here. And at the same time, it's shocking to me, actually, reading through this. I didn't reread it. Obviously, I mistook the person's gender all the way through. I didn't reread it all the way through before I shared it. I found it some years ago and read it then and thought I could wing it. But it is shocking to read through this now as to how much of a mirror it holds up for us, with a right wing now, a radical right that's got many of the same angers, many of the same concerns, many of the same emotions, many of the same philosophies, the friend-enemy distinction in particular, the group-based. That's what the real friend-enemy distinction problem is that it leads to not defending the truth, not defending what's right or wrong or good or healthy or ethical or anything like that. It defends a tribe and attacks other tribes, and you will tolerate evil and ugly and lie and falsehood on your tribe for expedience when you're operating in the warlike mindset of the concept of the political. The concept of the political was given by this philosopher, I'm trying to avoid saying the truth, that he was a Nazi philosopher called Carl Schmitt, and he's wrong. What he presents as the concept of the political, which is the distinction between friends and enemies, as the essential qualifying feature of politics, is the criterion not of politics but war. And we need to be careful with that rhetoric. We need to be careful with how we approach what we're doing, because we have a country to save. We have children to raise in that country, so saving it matters. Yes, the terms upon which it's saved matter too, but that cuts multiple ways. We have to have a safe and thriving society on the one hand, so how it's saved matters, but we also have to do it by the right methods and preserving the institutions and principles that allowed us to have a thriving society in the first place. So this holds up a mirror to us at a difficult time as well, and it's shocking to me and interesting to share it. So I hope this has been informative for you. That's my goal every time here on New Discourses. I thought this was going to be a lot shorter than it is, but thank you for bearing with me. Whether you think it's helpful or not, I'm just kidding. If you think it's helpful, no, whether you think it's helpful or not, tell your friends, share this. Get this information out there. I have whatever reach I have, but my reach is mostly word of mouth. It's mostly dependent on you. I guess liking and interacting on the YouTube or whatever platform matters to. Do that if you want, but get this information out there. Subscribe, get other people to subscribe. I'm trying to get a nation equipped to understand these issues. It's all I'm trying to do. All I've been interested in doing from the beginning, all the way back to 2015 or so, when I really stepped into this culture war fight. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for your help. And I hope we can continue fighting back and winning productively as we have been, and we don't lose ourselves in this ugly moment.